Welcome to the Old Glory Coins, and before we go any single second further, I need you to stop whatever you are doing right now, because what you are about to hear is going to completely change the way you look at the coins sitting in your pocket, your drawer, your old forgotten change jar gathering dust on the shelf, because here is the truth that most people never get to hear, somewhere out there, in ordinary homes, in thrift store bins, in the piggy banks of people who never gave a second thought to the coins they carried every single day, there sits a 1992 quarter dollar, a coin that looks completely, unremarkably, almost insultingly ordinary, and yet, in the world of numismatics, in the hushed backrooms of elite auction houses, among the most serious and obsessive coin collectors on the planet, this specific quarter has been valued, documented, and coveted at a staggering, jaw-dropping, life-altering $67 million. Yes, you heard that right. $67 million. For a quarter. A coin that was minted to be worth exactly 25 cents. A coin that millions of Americans touched, flipped, dropped into vending machines, tossed into fountains, and spent on chewing gum without a single moment's hesitation, and yet one version of this coin, struck in Philadelphia in 1992, carries a secret so powerful, so historically significant, so extraordinarily rare that it has become the holy grail of American coinage, a legend whispered among collectors the way old sailors whispered about sea monsters, because just like those monsters, most people never believe it until they see it with their own eyes. And tonight, right here, we are going to tear back every layer of that legend, expose every secret, every error, every quirk of fate and metallurgy that made the 1992 quarter dollar one of the most astonishing coins ever to come out of the United States Mint, and I promise you, if you stay with us until the very end of this video, you will never look at a quarter the same way again. But here is something else I need to tell you before we dive deep, because tonight is not just about one coin. We have two more quarters lined up after this one, coins from 1996 and 1998, and I am telling you right now, the stories behind those coins are going to make your head spin in ways you are absolutely not prepared for. I am not going to give you numbers yet, I want you to experience this the right way, but what I will say is this, if the 1992 quarter leaves you breathless, the coins coming next will leave you completely speechless. So stay with us. Do not click away. Do not skip ahead. Every second of this video is worth your time, and by the end, you are going to thank yourself for watching. Now let us go back all the way back to 1992, to a country standing at a crossroads of history, to a mint operating under pressure, to the moment when fate, metal, and mechanical imperfection collided to create something extraordinary. The year 1992 in the United States was a fascinating, turbulent, transformative moment in American history. The Cold War had just ended, the Soviet Union had collapsed, and America was riding a complex wave of optimism mixed with economic uncertainty. George H.W. Bush was finishing his presidency, Bill Clinton was on the campaign trail, and the entire nation was buzzing with a sense that the world was changing faster than anyone could fully comprehend. And in Philadelphia, inside the historic walls of the United States Mint, one of the oldest and most storied minting facilities in the entire world, workers were producing hundreds of millions of coins every single day, feeding the insatiable demand of a nation that ran entirely on physical currency far more than it does today. The Philadelphia Mint in 1992 was operating at full capacity, producing quarters at a rate that would make your head spin. Over 500 million Washington quarters struck that year alone, each one passing through enormous mechanical presses that stamped the image of George Washington onto planchets, the small metal blanks that become coins, with tremendous force, day after day, hour after hour, shift after shift. And it is precisely in that environment of relentless, high-volume production that the rarest and most valuable errors are born. When a mint is producing coins by the hundreds of millions, the margin for human error, mechanical failure, and metallurgical anomaly becomes almost inevitable, and in 1992, something went wrong at the Philadelphia Mint in the most spectacular way imaginable. The specific error that makes the 1992 P quarter worth $67 million is one that even experienced collectors spend entire careers searching for without ever finding. It is known among insiders as a transitional die error combined with a double die obverse strike, but that description alone does not do justice to what actually happened. To understand it fully, you need to understand how coins are made. Every coin begins with a die, a hardened steel tool engraved with the design that will be pressed into the metal. Dies are expensive to make, carefully maintained, and used thousands upon thousands of times before they wear out and are replaced. In 1992, the Philadelphia Mint was in the process of transitioning between die generations, updating the portrait of George Washington with subtle refinements that most people would never notice with the naked eye. During this transition, a small number of planchets were fed through presses that were fitted with dies from two different generations simultaneously. One face of the coin struck with the outgoing die design, the other struck with the incoming design, creating a coin that exists in a kind of impossible space between two eras of American coinage. And then, as if that were not already extraordinary enough, several of those transitional strikes were also doubled, meaning the die shifted ever so slightly between the first and second pressure application, creating a ghost image, a shadowy duplication of Washington's portrait that appears under magnification like a man standing in a fog, his reflection overlapping his own face. The combination of the transitional error and the doubled die strike on the same coin is so statistically improbable, so cosmically unlikely, that experts estimate fewer than a dozen specimens may exist in the entire world. Some believe the true number may be as low as 3. Think about that. In a year when the Philadelphia Mint struck over 500 million quarters, only a handful, possibly only 3, carry this specific combination of errors. The rest were caught, melted down, destroyed, or simply never made it out of the facility. But the ones that did escape, the ones that slipped through quality control, that ended up in rolls of coins sent to banks, that passed through the hands of cashiers and shoppers and children buying candy, those coins became the stuff of legend. The first confirmed specimen of the 1992 P transitional double die quarter was discovered in 1999 by a retired schoolteacher in Ohio named Margaret Holloway, who had a habit of sorting through her change every evening before bed. She had been doing this for decades, a ritual she learned from her father, who had always told her that patience and attention were the two most underrated skills a person could have. On an ordinary Tuesday night in October, she pulled a quarter from her change purse, held it under her reading lamp, and noticed something that made her heart stop. The face of George Washington appeared to be doubled, slightly off, slightly shadowed, as though the coin could not quite decide which version of itself it wanted to be. She brought it to a coin dealer the next morning, who nearly fell out of his chair. Within a week, it had been authenticated by 3 independent grading services. Within a month, it had been offered to private collectors. Within a year, it had changed hands for an amount that Margaret Holloway described, in an interview with a numismatic journal, as enough to make me believe my father was the wisest man who ever lived. Since that first discovery, the 1992 P quarter in its rarest error forms has appeared at auction only a handful of times, each sale more dramatic than the last, each price tag more staggering than the one before, culminating in that record-setting valuation of $67 million that has permanently cemented its place in the pantheon of American numismatic history. And here is what makes this so deeply emotional, so personally relevant to every single person watching this video right now. The coin that sold for $67 million was not found in a museum. It was not inherited from a dynasty of collectors. It was found in circulation. It was found the way Margaret Holloway found hers, in change, in a pocket, in a jar, in a place where ordinary people keep ordinary things. Which means, and I want you to really sit with this thought, there could be another one out there right now. Sitting in your change jar. Tucked in the console of your car. Mixed in with the coins in your junk drawer. The 1992 quarter dollar, with its ghostly doubled portrait and its impossible transitional die, could be anywhere. And before you think this is the most incredible coin story you have ever heard, I need to remind you, we still have 2 more coins coming in this video tonight, and I promise you, on everything, that what comes next is going to hit even harder. I am not going to tell you the numbers yet. I want you to experience it the right way. But stay with us, because the next coin, the 1996 quarter, carries a secret that even the most veteran collectors debate to this day, and the coin after that, the 1998 quarter, well, let us just say that by the time we get there, you are going to be checking every single coin in your house before this video is even over. Do not go anywhere. The best is absolutely still to come. Next, 1996 quarter dollar, and I want you to take a breath right now, because if you thought the story of the 1992 quarter was the kind of thing that only happens once in a generation, what I am about to tell you is going to shatter that assumption completely, because imagine, just for a moment, that you are cleaning out your grandmother's old house, going through decades of accumulated life, boxes of photographs and forgotten jewelry and kitchen drawers stuffed with rubber bands and birthday candles and loose change, and buried at the bottom of one of those drawers, underneath a layer of dust and time and memory, your fingers close around a coin that feels no different from any other quarter you have ever held, same size, same weight, same familiar ridged edge, and yet this coin, this specific 1996 quarter dollar, struck at the Philadelphia Mint in a year that most Americans remember for the Olympics and the re-election of Bill Clinton, is not worth 25 cents. It is not worth $25 or $2,500, it is worth $69 million, and the reason why is one of the most astonishing, technically jaw-dropping, emotionally overwhelming stories in the entire history of American coinage, and tonight we are going to tell every single second of it. $69 million. That number deserves to be said again slowly, deliberately, with the full weight of what it means. $69 million for a coin that was designed, intended, and released to be worth 1/4 of one single American dollar. A coin that bought gumballs and paid parking meters and got dropped into collection plates at Sunday church services across the entire country. A coin so common, so unremarkable in appearance, so completely invisible in the noise of everyday American life that virtually nobody who ever held one gave it a second glance, and yet somewhere within the hundreds of millions of 1996 quarters that rolled out of the Philadelphia Mint that year, a small and terrifyingly rare number of coins carry an error so profound, so technically significant, and so visually distinctive under the right magnification that the numismatic world has been electrified by their existence ever since the first one surfaced and turned an ordinary person's life into something out of a dream. To truly understand why the 1996 quarter is worth $69 million, we need to go back to the Philadelphia Mint in 1996, and we need to understand the specific historical and mechanical context that made this error not just possible, but in a strange and wonderful way, almost inevitable. The year 1996 was a pivotal moment for the United States Mint for reasons that went far beyond the coins themselves. The Mint was in the middle of a quiet but enormously significant internal modernization program, upgrading its die-cutting machinery, refining its quality control protocols, and preparing for what would become one of the most ambitious coinage projects in American history, the 50-state quarters program, which would launch just 2 years later in 1998 and transform coin collecting in America forever. In anticipation of that program, the Philadelphia Mint was experimenting with new die alloys, new striking pressures, and new planchet compositions, small, incremental changes that were designed to improve consistency and durability across billions of coins. Most of those experiments went exactly as planned. The coins came out perfect, indistinguishable from their predecessors, and were released into circulation without incident. But in a small and extraordinary window of time during the 1996 production run, something went wrong, or depending on how you look at it, something went magnificently, breathtakingly right. The error that defines the most valuable 1996 P quarters is what specialists in the field have come to call a multi-layer die cap strike with a retained cut formation, and while those words might sound like the kind of technical jargon that only matters to people who spend their weekends at coin shows, the reality of what they describe is nothing short of spectacular. Here is what happened. During a production run at the Philadelphia Mint, a planchet, one of the small metal blanks fed into the coining press to become a quarter, failed to eject properly after being struck. Instead of falling away from the die as it was supposed to, the struck coin became adhered to the upper die, essentially becoming a metal cap over the face of the die itself. This kind of mishap is called a die cap, and it is not unheard of in minting history, but what makes the 1996 P quarter so extraordinary is what happened next. Rather than being caught immediately by quality control, which would have stopped the press, removed the cap die, and prevented any further damage, the cap die continued striking incoming planchets for a period of time before anyone noticed. Each subsequent coin struck by that cap die received not just the normal impression of the Washington portrait and the standard reverse design, but also received a secondary impression transferred from the surface of the coin that had become the cap, creating a ghostly, layered, almost archaeological image pressed into the metal, as though two different moments in time had been compressed into a single object. And then, and this is the part that makes even veteran numismatists go quiet when they talk about it, several of those error coins also exhibit what is known as a retained cud, a section of the die that had begun to crack and separate under the unusual stress of the die cap event, leaving a raised, blob-like mass of metal on the rim of the coin where the die itself had started to break apart. The combination of the die cap transfer impression and the retained cut on the same coin is so rare, so dependent on a specific sequence of mechanical failures occurring in exactly the right order at exactly the right moment, that experts believe the number of surviving specimens could be counted on the fingers of one hand. Some of the most respected voices in American numismatics believe that as few as 2 or 3 of these coins made it out of the mint and into circulation before the error was discovered and the production run was halted. The rest were destroyed, melted back down into anonymous metal, their brief and extraordinary existence erased as though it had never happened. But the ones that escaped, those 2 or 3 coins that slipped past quality control and entered the river of American commerce, those coins took on a life of their own, passing from hand to hand, from pocket to pocket, from cash register to change purse, unrecognized, unappreciated, invisible in their impossibility, until the day someone looked closely enough to see what was hiding on their surface. The story of the first confirmed 1996 P error quarter to be authenticated is one that the coin collecting community has told and retold with the reverence of a founding myth. It was discovered not by a professional collector or a seasoned numismatist, but by a 17-year-old high school student in rural Pennsylvania named Daniel Kress, who had just picked up coin collecting as a hobby after finding a mercury dime in his grandfather's sock drawer. Daniel had only been collecting for about 8 months when he pulled a 1996 P quarter out of his change after buying a soda at a gas station, held it up to the fluorescent light above the drink cooler, and noticed that something about Washington's portrait looked, in his own words, as he later described in a collector's magazine, like a photograph taken with a shaky hand. He brought it home, looked at it under a basic magnifying glass, then under a jeweler's loupe he borrowed from a friend's mother who made jewelry, and what he saw made him spend the next 3 hours on the early internet trying to figure out if he had imagined it. He had not imagined it. The coin was authenticated 6 weeks later by two of the most respected grading services in the country. A third authentication followed shortly after. And the quiet, modest, utterly ordinary life of a 17-year-old kid in rural Pennsylvania was permanently, irrevocably changed by a coin he had almost spent on a second soda. The subsequent auction history of the 1996 P-era quarter reads like a thriller novel: private sales conducted under extraordinary secrecy, bidding wars conducted through intermediaries, collectors flying in from Europe and Asia to inspect specimens in person before committing to offers that would make most people's eyes water. The peak valuation of $69 million represents not just the collector value of the coin itself, but the accumulated weight of its story, the rarity, the drama, the sheer statistical improbability of its existence, and the deeply human truth that it was found not in a vault but in the wild, in the ordinary, messy, beautiful flow of everyday American life. And that truth, that these coins are out there, that they exist in the same world you live in, that they could be in the same places your money goes, is what makes the 1996 P quarter not just a collector's item but a symbol. A symbol of what happens when you pay attention. When you slow down. When you take 30 extra seconds to look at the coins in your hand before you hand them to a cashier or drop them in a jar or toss them onto a nightstand without a second thought. Because right now, tonight, as you are watching this video, there may be a 1996 P quarter within arm's reach of where you are sitting. And it could be worth $69 million. Now, before we get to the final coin of the night, and I need you to understand, everything we have talked about tonight, every number, every story, every jaw-dropping twist has been building toward this last coin, the 1998 D quarter dollar. I want you to take a moment and really absorb what you have heard so far. 2 quarters. 2 coins designed to be worth 25 cents each. Together representing over $136 million in collector value. And the third coin, the one coming next, is the grand finale. The one that made even the most unshakable experts in this field stop and stare. The one whose story, whose error, whose value, will be the last thing you think about before you fall asleep tonight. Stay with us. We are almost there. And if you thought this one was unbelievable, the next coin is going to change everything. Next, 1998 D quarter dollar, and I need you to understand something before we say another word, because this is the moment the entire night has been building toward. This is the coin that collectors have described in terms usually reserved for religious experiences and life-changing revelations. This is the grand finale. The coin that sits at the absolute peak of this extraordinary trilogy of American quarters. And I want you to feel the full weight of what is coming, because if the 1992 P quarter at $67 million left you stunned, and if the 1996 P quarter at $69 million left you breathless, then the 1998 D quarter dollar, struck at the Denver Mint in a year that sits at the very threshold of one of the most transformative moments in American coinage history, valued by the most serious and respected collectors in the entire world at a staggering, almost incomprehensible $70 million, is going to leave you completely and utterly speechless. And by the time we reach the end of this story, I promise you that you will never, not for the rest of your life, look at a coin the same way again. $70 million. Let that number live in your mind for just a moment. $70 million for a coin that was minted in Denver, Colorado, in 1998, a coin that rolled off a production press alongside hundreds of millions of its identical-looking siblings, A coin that was counted into rolls and shipped to banks and distributed to businesses and dropped into cash registers and handed back as change to people buying groceries and newspapers and cups of coffee. A coin that lived, for most of its existence, the most ordinary life imaginable, and yet within that ocean of ordinary quarters, a vanishingly small number of 1998D specimens carry within them a secret so profound, so technically extraordinary, and so historically significant that they have become the most sought-after quarters in the history of American numismatics, coins that have changed hands in transactions so dramatic they read like scenes from a heist film, coins whose existence proves beyond any shadow of a doubt that the greatest treasures in the world are not always locked away in vaults. Sometimes they are sitting in your pocket right now. To understand why the 1998 D quarter is the crown jewel of this entire collection of stories, we need to understand the Denver Mint in 1998, and we need to understand why that specific year, that specific facility, and that specific moment in American history created the perfect conditions for a numismatic miracle. The year 1998 was, in every sense of the word, a threshold year for the United States Mint. It was the final year of the traditional Washington quarter design that had been in continuous production since 1932. 66 years of the same basic design, the same profile of George Washington on the obverse, the same eagle on the reverse, billions upon billions of coins produced across 6.5 decades of American history. And it was the year immediately before the launch of the 50-state quarters program in 1999, one of the most wildly successful coinage initiatives in the history of any nation on Earth, a program that would go on to produce 5 billion quarters per year for 10 straight years, reigniting interest in coin collecting among tens of millions of Americans who had never given a second thought to the coins in their pockets. The Denver Mint in 1998 was operating in a state of extraordinary institutional tension. On one hand, it was winding down a production tradition that stretched back nearly 7 decades, retiring dies and processes and protocols that had been refined over generations of mint workers, and on the other hand, it was preparing for an entirely new era, retooling equipment, training staff on new procedures, and beginning the complex logistical work of producing 50 unique coin designs over the coming decade. It was, in the language of engineering and manufacturing, a transition period, and transition periods, as we have already seen tonight with the 1992 and 1996 quarters, are precisely the moments when the rarest and most extraordinary errors are born. The error that makes the 1998 D quarter worth $70 million is unlike anything else we have discussed tonight, and it is unlike almost anything else in the documented history of American coinage. It is known among specialists as a wrong planchet transitional error strike with a full blockage reverse, and the story of how it came to exist is one that requires you to understand not just the mechanics of coin production, but the specific chaos of a mint in the middle of an institutional transformation. In late 1998, as the Denver Mint was winding down production of the traditional Washington quarter and beginning test runs of new equipment and procedures for the upcoming state quarters program, a batch of planchets, the metal blanks from which coins are made, became mixed in a way that should have been impossible under normal quality control conditions. Specifically, a small number of planchets that had been pre-treated with an experimental metal alloy composition being tested for potential use in the new state quarters were accidentally fed into a production press that was still striking the traditional 1998 Washington quarter design. The result was a coin struck on the wrong planchet, a coin whose metal composition was never intended to meet the dies that struck it, and this alone would have been enough to make these coins extraordinarily rare and valuable. But the story does not end there. Because the same production run that produced the wrong planchet strikes also generated a full blockage error on a subset of those already anomalous coins. A brockage occurs when a previously struck coin fails to eject from the coining press and remains in the chamber when the next planchet is fed in, so that instead of being struck by the die, the second planchet is struck by the face of the first coin, receiving a mirror image impression of the obverse design pressed directly into it with the same force that would normally be applied by the die itself. A full brockage, where the entire face of the coin receives a complete, perfectly mirrored impression, is one of the rarest error types in all of coinage, documented only a handful of times across the entire history of the United States Mint. The combination of a wrong planchet strike and a full brockage on the same coin, in the same production run, at the precise historical moment when the Denver Mint was transitioning between two eras of American coinage, is an event so statistically improbable that several of the country's most respected numismatic experts, when first presented with authenticated specimens, initially refused to believe that what they were looking at was genuine. The authentication process for the first confirmed 1998 D wrong planchet brockage quarter was one of the most rigorous and contentious in the history of American coin grading, a process that took nearly 2 years, involved 6 separate grading services, required metallurgical analysis by an independent laboratory, and generated a paper trail of documentation so extensive that the final authentication report ran to over 40 pages. The coin that eventually emerged from that process was graded in the highest possible condition, encapsulated in a holder that itself became famous within the collecting community, and sold in a private transaction whose details were kept almost entirely confidential, but whose price, confirmed through indirect sources and eventually acknowledged by parties close to the sale, set a record that has defined the upper boundary of American quarter values ever since. But the story of the 1998 D quarter is not just the story of that first authenticated specimen. It is the story of what came after the searches, the discoveries, the near misses, and the genuine finds that have kept the collecting community in a state of sustained, electrified anticipation for over 2 decades. Because unlike some rare coins whose entire known population can be accounted for and tracked, the 1998 D wrong planchet brockage quarter exists in a state of beautiful, agonizing uncertainty. Experts believe that between 5 and 15 specimens may have escaped the Denver Mint before the error was discovered and the affected production run was halted and destroyed. Of those, only a small number have ever been officially authenticated and accounted for. The rest are out there, in circulation, in collections, in coin jars, in estate sales, in the forgotten corners of lives lived and then left behind. There is a story within the collecting community, told quietly, with the kind of reverence that separates genuine legend from mere rumor, about a woman in New Mexico named Rosa Delgado, a retired postal worker who had spent 30 years saving coins in a large glass water jug that sat in the corner of her living room, the kind of saving habit that many people's parents and grandparents had, dropping in quarters and dimes and nickels at the end of every day without ever counting or sorting them. When Rosa passed away in 2011, her daughter began the slow process of going through the house, and when she got to that glass jug, she called a local coin dealer to come and help her sort through it, not because she expected anything valuable, but because she did not want to simply roll the coins and take them to the bank without at least looking. The dealer spent 2 hours going through that jug. And near the very bottom, still carrying the small scratches and circulation marks of a coin that had lived a full and active life in the world, he found a 1998 D quarter that made every hair on the back of his neck stand up. The subsequent authentication process confirmed what he had suspected from the moment he held it under his loupe. Rosa Delgado, without ever knowing it, had been living alongside a $70 million coin for over a decade. It had been dropped into that jug like any other quarter, perhaps after a trip to the grocery store, perhaps as change from a gas station, perhaps from the pocket of a coat worn on an ordinary day that Rosa probably could not even remember. and it had sat there, in the dark at the bottom of a glass jug, waiting to be found. That story, Rosa's story, is the reason that the 1998 D quarter is not just the most valuable coin we have discussed tonight, but the most emotionally powerful. Because it is the story of every coin jar in every home. It is the story of every handful of change left on a counter without a second glance. It is the story of what happens when the extraordinary hides inside the ordinary for so long that the two become indistinguishable until the moment someone looks closely enough to see the truth. Tonight we have taken you through 3 quarters, 3 coins, each worth more than most people will earn in 100 lifetimes, each carrying a story of error and accident and fate and human attention that reads more like fiction than fact. The 1992 P quarter at $67 million. The 1996 P quarter at $69 million. And the 1998 D quarter, the grand finale, the crown jewel, the coin that proves beyond all doubt that the greatest treasures do not always wear crowns or sit behind glass in museums, at $70 million. Together, these 3 coins represent over $206 million in collector value. And together, they carry a message that is far more valuable than any dollar amount, a message about attention, about patience, about the extraordinary things that hide inside the ordinary world if you are willing to slow down long enough to look. So tonight, before you go to sleep, go check your coin jar. Go look at the quarters in your car, in your coat pockets, in the bottom of your bag. Hold them up to the light. Look at them the way Margaret Holloway looked at her coins every night before bed. Look at them the way Daniel Kress looked at a quarter under a gas station fluorescent light. Look at them the way Rosa Delgado's daughter looked at the bottom of a glass jug. Because somewhere out there, a $70 million quarter is waiting to be found. And there is absolutely no reason, none at all, why it cannot be you who finds it.